Hey everyone, it's Brooks Kubik and John Wood. We're back with another episode of Dinosaur Radio, and we're going to jump right into it. Let me tee it up by telling you that John has done a deep dive into training advice on the internet, and I want him to tell you about it. John, take it away.
Well, I won't get too far into the backstory, but the long and the short of it is that recently I came upon someone who had posted on a Facebook group, and he said, I've been training for 2 years and now I've reached a plateau. I'm looking for some training advice on how to get beyond it. And it started out, for whatever reason, this piqued my interest. And it started out, there were 300 replies when I first came upon it. And then I've been checking back since then. Now there's over 1,000. And I was real curious as to what kind of advice the people that were in this group were going to give him as far as what the problem was or how to get his training back on track. And I was overcome by how bad the advice was that he was getting. And we'll talk about some of the specifics with that, but this is just, I think, the state of the art on the internet these days. If you're going to go there and expect to get solutions to your problems, it's going to be hit or miss at best.
What were some of the bits of advice or pieces of advice that people were offering?
Well, most of it was pretty predictable. Uh, I think the top one I would say was if you're not getting results, you should increase your frequency and increase your volume. Now you have to understand that when this guy explained his current uh, routine that he was doing, he said that he had quote unquote cut back from training 7 days a week, 2 hours a day. He was now doing only 5 or 6 workouts a week for 2 hours a day. So when people suggest increasing frequency and volume, I'm not quite sure how that would even be possible for this guy. I mean, it should be pretty obvious that he is massively overtrained just to begin with. So adding more work, physiological work into the equation is not going to all of a sudden get the growth processes to kick in.
So he was saying that he was already training 5 or 6 hours, or I'm sorry, 5 or 6 days a week for 2 hours a workout. And people said that's not enough. You need to do more.
Yes. Yes, I would say at least 20 to 30% of the replies said he needed to increase the volume and the frequency of his training.
Okay. Um, so that's 25 to 30% of the replies. What's the next group or category of advice?
I'd say well over half said you've obviously reached your natural limit. It's time to start doing drugs. And they gave various suggestions on particular brands or types and what kind and how many. That's not my bag. I couldn't speak to that in any capacity other than I have no interest in it. But this guy clearly had not been anywhere close to his quote unquote natural limit. Whatever it is that he was doing. And the other thing I wanted to mention is that when he talked about the plateau, he said he had been in a plateau for the last 5 months, which I thought was an interesting thing. He had been lifting for 2 years, but he had been experiencing a plateau for 5 months. Now, I don't know whether his reference to a plateau meant gaining body weight or gaining strength. He didn't specify that. So I'm not sure which one he was specifically referring to. A lot of people said, well, if you want to gain weight, you just got to increase the calories, which is true. But if the training side of things is all over the map, which it clearly was, then it's really not going to help him out in the ways that he's looking for.
Did some people suggest food supplements, more protein, more creatine, or creatine, whatever,
All
stuff
of
like
that
that?
stuff. But what was interesting is people said, well, you should be eating more carbs or you should cut out carbs. Whatever you're doing, do the opposite. Take more creatine, take more protein, increase your calories. The suggestion was 4 to 5,000 a day. Um, So, I mean, yeah, the suggestion if his only goal was to increase weight mass, not solid mass, but just bulk for the sake of bulk, yeah, stuff the calories in. That's pretty straightforward. But it was amazing to me how there was always a suggestion on one extreme or the other. So somebody would come in and say, you need more carbs, and then a couple posts later, somebody say, well, you need to cut out your carbs. And I can only imagine what's going through this guy's head because all the suggestions here are sending him in 1,000 different directions. None of them good.
Okay, so let me ask this. Did anybody, this is a guy who, let's focus on his goals for a second, as he articulated them, if he did. He wanted to gain more muscle mass. Is that
Presumably, he only said that he was in a plateau. He did not specify what that meant exactly. Uh, I would assume a plateau, based on what he said, based on what he posted, would mean that he's not gaining strength and therefore he's not gaining muscle. But it may very well be he's just using the plateau as a means of the gauge that he's using is gaining weight relative to the scale. So it could go either way. So it was not clear by what he had posted.
did anyone offer the advice of build your strength in the basic exercises?
There were a very few suggestions, like maybe one out of every 50 that said, hey, you're probably doing too much. And a few of them said, you're doing the wrong split. You should be doing, everybody knows you should be doing back on arm day and leg day and cardio day. And then, they had some suggestions in that regard. None of them, almost none of these suggestions out of 1,000 plus suggested, well, why don't you just focus on getting stronger? So I thought that was pretty telling.
So a very low percentage of people focused on increase your strength.
Almost none.
Did anyone suggest doing heavy power rack training?
I don't believe so.
Did
Somebody,
anyone?
a few
Go
people
ahead.
said, "Oh, you got to lift heavier and do less reps." Um, they suggested you should lift more explosively. You should do heavy squats. You should eat another 1,000 calories. Do free weights. Don't do machines. Do machines, but don't do free weights. You can see where this is heading pretty much.
Do you think that any of the people who were answering this have actually trained others successfully based on their responses?
My interpretation was no, because I'm looking at this list. I have a whole list of back and front of a piece of paper. There may be 100 different things that I wrote down here, and I would say about 98% of them are just flat out nonsense. Um, somebody would say,
Okay.
oh, if you have a plateau, you should do push-ups every day, or stop counting reps. I don't know what that's going to do for you. Somebody suggested do a shock week, 7 days a week, 2 hours a day, do every exercise you can think of, and then eat like a pig. I don't know what, any of this will lead to in a productive manner other than more problems down the road. I mean, it's certainly not going to solve one or more of the issues that are preventing this guy from getting any results in the short term.
What would you suggest that he do?
Well, first of all, if he's training 7 days a week and 2 hours a day, I would suggest him take a week off because I have to think that whatever he's doing, he's massively overtraining. Several of the suggestions when they talked about doing more volume, they suggested we should be doing 20 sets for each muscle group. One guy suggested, well, you have to figure out a 1 rep max for every exercise that you're doing in every workout, which I know this guy's a younger guy. I don't think he had kids from what I could tell. So his time was not taken up in that regard. But I think to me, it's when you're stuck in a hole, rule number one is to stop digging. which no matter what he was doing from that point forward, if he was spending 10 hours a week in the weight room, it was just adding to all the problems that he was going to start experiencing from then on. Once he was sufficiently recovered, which probably would he should probably, if he's been doing 10 to 14 hours a week training for the last several years, he should probably take a month off.
Did he anywhere post his workout exercises, sets, reps, weights?
He may have. I didn't look into it too closely. I think at one point he said he does a bro split, chest, biceps, legs, shoulders, back, triceps, Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, um, something like that. He did say specifically that he doesn't write his workouts down, that he just goes, when he goes to the gym, he just has a general idea of shoulder day or leg day or whatever, and then just kind of wings it from there, which is not any great surprise.
Okay. So basically, this is a guy who's doing the bro split stuff, putting in very frequent workouts, long hours of training. He's not getting results. And nobody seems to have any idea of what to do except do more of the bro stuff.
Pretty much.
Is that a fair summary?
Pretty much. A few people here and there like suggested, hey, you're doing too much. This is overtraining, but it certainly did not seem like it was the type of advice that he wanted to hear or would adhere to at all in any capacity. I don't know how he could do any more than he was already doing, if in fact he was doing 2 hours a day, 5, 6, 7 days a week. So, I mean, that's a part-time job.
It would be interesting to know more about what he does for a living and what other demands he has on his time, his recuperation, his recovery, all of those factors. Did he talk at all about his diet?
He may have. I didn't look too closely. I think that he said he does protein powder, he does creatine, and I'm sure other stuff. He did say he was natural for the time being, whatever that is worth. So I imagine that his diet's probably fairly average. He was lean. I mean, he looked athletic, but he wasn't the kind of guy that you would see at the swimming pool and say, hey, that guy lifts weights. So he didn't have any evidence that he had been lifting for any amount of time.
One of the things that I've thought about over the years, and I think about it more and more, is that the proliferation of training information on the internet perhaps was a good thing at one point in time. But I think it's reached the stage where it is a very bad thing for most people. And the reason is there's far too much bad information out there. The algorithms don't search based on whether information is valid or accurate or good, whether it will in fact be useful or produce good results. The algorithm gives you information based on your own previous searches and on the searches of other people. And not other experts or other people who truly know what they're doing. It's just people who are randomly searching the internet looking for entertainment. And that's how a particular site or web page or influencer starts to get lots of attention and then starts to show up in the suggested for you and the feeds and everything that the search engines drive. And so we end up in a loop of endless contradictory information. And people get lost in that.
Yeah.
And they lose sight of the basics. They lose sight of what truly works. And they end up in a world where they're giving ridiculous advice, absolutely absurd advice. I mean, if somebody is training 2 hours a day, 5 or 6 days a week, and they're not making progress, then the immediate obvious answer is number one, you're overtrained, rest for 4 days a week, 2 weeks, whatever, and then come back to it and train less frequently, with less volume, but much harder. That's a very simple thing, and it's something that the real experts in the field, the people who understand this, going back to the days of Perry Rader, talked about this often back in the 50s, back in the 40s, back in the 30s. John Grimmick wrote about this back in the 40s. John Grimmick told the story about not making any progress in his training as a young man, and he got so frustrated that he quit training. He just said, that's it, done, not going to do anymore. And after not training for 4 or 5 days, he realized that his muscles were growing. And at that moment, he had one of these, it was an aha situation where the young Grimmick realized his problem had been training too much, too long, doing too many exercises. So he got back into training, he cut back, and he made incredible progress. And that story's been around for almost 100 years now. It's been out there, but people still miss it. And in the modern internet age, the algorithm is not going to take you to that.
For
You're
some
just not going to find it. Instead, you find the silly stuff. Go ahead.
for some reason, people always default to doing more. And I think that we're conditioned to believe that in a lot of different areas, which is true, is if you study 4 hours for a test, you'll do better than if you studied 3 hours. Or if you work 20 hours a week, you'll make more money. You have a bigger paycheck if you work 4 or 40 hours a week. I mean, it's just a simple equation there, but it doesn't work with strength training. And I think one of the major problems in this situation and in many of the situations that we deal with on a daily basis and tangentially in our own training, just because we're aware of it, is that we understand the process and how it's supposed to work. And if you don't know what's supposed to be happening, then there's no possible way. And you don't have a way. And this guy, because he didn't write down his workouts, because he just did stuff, he had no way of actually knowing whether his training was working or not. He did what a lot of people do, is that they go to the gym, they just kind of do stuff and they hope for the best. And what he found is that he certainly wasn't getting stronger in terms of adding muscular body weight. I'm sure if he had been writing things down, he would definitely see that there's no actual increase in terms of the amount of weight that he's able to lift. He could just stay in the gym and spend longer. I mean, his mind defaults to, oh, I'll do another 10 sets of bicep curls or something like that. But I think that most people, if they're instead of asking, they're running around, they're chasing their tails saying, well, what should we do? And the real question is, what's the problem?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good way of phrasing it. And basically, what it boils down to is people are focused on unimportant things or things that help the situation, I'm sorry, that hurt the situation rather than help the situation. And that's, I think, a function of bad advice on the internet, which has become absolutely epidemic. It's
Absolutely.
completely rampant.
And I was struck also by the suggestions that he was getting, which were nebulous. There wasn't anything to them. So somebody would say, oh, you want to get better results? You got to increase your mind muscle connection. Okay, what does that mean exactly? Somebody said, you got to volumize your workouts. You got to, what else do we have here? Lift more explosively. Those could mean all kinds of things. What are the chances that this guy figures out what he's doing wrong, figures out what he's supposed to be doing, and then starts doing it? I think zero. He's just either doesn't have the capacity or he's just getting bombarded with so much information here that he will end up doing absolutely nothing differently, if he's even able to, because at the rate that he's going, he's got the benefit of youth that he's able to stand 2 hours a day, 7 days a week, 5, 6, 7 days a week. Eventually, he's going to hurt himself. He's going to blow a tendon. He's going to tweak his knee or his low back or something like that. And then he won't be able to train at all.
Well, or the other thing that's going to happen is he follows the crazy dietary advice, the 5 or 6,000 calorie a day thing, and gets fat, or he goes the drug route
Yep.
and ends up screwing up his endocrine system, diminishing his own natural production of testosterone and other hormones, and ending up basically having to be on anabolic steroids or HRT for the rest of his life, which if you're in your 20s means, you know, what, 40 or 50, 60 years of having to be on a drug because you messed up the internal mechanisms of your body. Not very smart. And here's the related thing I'm going to throw out. What are the real goals that are in play here? What is this person trying to achieve? I don't hear, I want to be in a powerlifting contest. I want to be in a weightlifting contest. I want to be in the strongman contest. I want to increase my ability in another sport of my choice. I want to be a bodybuilder. I want to get on stage and pose and have people clap and cheer for me. All I hear is he wants to get big and have a particular look and walk around looking a particular way. Don't know why. And in my experience, when you go down that route, which is a very intangible goal, you never achieve what you're looking for. You're never big enough. You're never whatever enough. You're never satisfied. And he's probably living in a world where he is comparing himself to professional bodybuilders who have literally 1 in a million, if not 1 in 10 million genetics for bodybuilding. And at the professional level, as far as anyone knows, are all using massive amounts of PEDs.
Yeah.
Okay. So if that's his comparator, if that's what he wants to do, that would be like someone who's 5'7" who says, I want to play center in the NBA. It's not going to happen. You're dooming yourself to a life of failure because you have unrealistic goals and expectations. And I think that's partly what's driving this sort of thing. This idea of, oh my God, I've plateaued, I'm not big enough. Maybe you're doing a heck of a lot better than you think. You just don't realize it because you're comparing yourself to something that can't happen.
Yeah, I think unrealistic expectations are a big driver of a lot of the problems that most people experience. And also, as we see directly here, he has no clue what he's even trying to accomplish in the first place. And I think a lot of young people, they say, well, what do you want to do in your training? I want gains. Well, what does that mean? I want to get barn door lats. I want to get abs for days. Well, okay, there's nothing there that's definite. Whereas if you say, hey, I want to bench press 300 pounds, I want to squat 250 pounds or 400 pounds or whatever the case may be. These are things that at least have some relevance that can be measured and monitored and checked from workout to workout. And to me, every workout is a means of seeing whether you did the correct thing in your last workout. Because if you did, then you should see improvement from workout to workout. This is how the process should work. I don't see any other way for the process to work, because if you're talking about, well, I want gains, quote unquote, it means some kind of addition beyond what was there previously. One of the suggestions to this guy, the only time it was mentioned was, well, it's about time you should start training progressively, which is true. But if you're not in the gym and you're not training progressively, then just what in the heck are you doing?
Yeah, training progressively is pretty good advice for everyone and anyone. And it sounds like it'd be really good advice, not only for this guy, but for everyone who set in the silly advice.
Yeah, but I mean, that also assumes that they understand what progressive resistance exercise looks like, is composed of, what the requirements are. And this is where you and I both come in, is we're trying to get people to understand these principles, and some will and some push it away with all their might. They want to focus on all the other silly stuff that's out there, all the ridiculous advice that has no bearing on actual physiological principles.
That's very true. Very true. Well, we're probably at the end of the segment now. What can you say, and maybe you just did it, what can you say in just one or two sentences to summarize what you found and why it's a problem for people?
I think as a rule, stay away from the internet in terms of advice. And all these guys were strangers. Some of them, many of them posted without, it was clearly not their real name. They could have been anybody. They could have been bots for all I know. And I'm sure a good percentage of them probably were. But I think maybe in a further episode, we will take someone like this person, the gentleman that was getting this experience, and we say, okay, well, here's what you should do. Here's what, according to what you and I both know is true relative to training. So that I think that would make a good follow-up to this episode is to say, okay, put all that stuff, the advice that you're getting, the answers that you're getting, put those to the side. Now, maybe that's also the crux of the matter is that most people, even though they know it's bad advice, they'll still say, well, maybe I ought to give it a shot. And you'll see that pretty frequently on the internet as well, is that people will go back to good advice because they're at their wits' end, or maybe it just sounds interesting, or maybe they're just bored. Who knows? But there's a whole lot of psychology tied up in the situation that we're describing.
Well, that's true. And that's another topic for another show. The psychology of bad advice, the psychology of failure, the psychology of success. Lots of stuff to talk about. Well, why don't we leave it there and just want to thank all of the listeners for listening and remind everybody if you have a specific topic that you'd like us to cover, shoot it in, send an email to John, send an email to me, leave a comment below, and we'll see what we can do. John, thanks much. And everyone out there, thanks for listening.
Thank you, Brooks. Until next time.